Hello everyone, welcome to another installment of Reflections, a Cuong Nhu History. My name is Joseph Schachter. Behind the camera is Mark Brandenburg, and we are honored and privileged today to have with us Master Alan Haas and Sensei David Killian. For a little background, Sensei David, and stop me if I get this wrong even though I'm looking at your notes, you started Cuong Nhu in fall of 1973, and that was a time when Kung Fu was a very big thing in popular culture. You were in the, pronounce this for me, I see Chung Fu, Inner Truth class, which was the 5th class taught at UF, and O Sensei was your first instructor.
Yep.
You advanced through the ranks, and one of the things I understand is you're also a Godan in Aikido, as well as a 4th degree black belt in Cuong Nhu. So, start date of September 1973. Alan, yours is on my phone. You graduated from Georgia Tech in 72 and started Pimsleur Haas, which was architecture, which was established in 1991. And you're retired now.
I am.
December 2014, and a professional artist. You began your Cuong Nhu career in the first class of Sung Ming Shu in Atlanta, March 1981. You got your black belt in 1986 and were the senior student of primary instructor Master Mary Davis Cates. You headed the school for a while, currently a Shichi Dan 7th degree black belt. Excellent credentials from both of you. It's a real pleasure to be able to do this. So, starting with Alan, please tell us about your first contact with Cuong Nhu, when, where, and with whom.
Actually, my first contact was, I was having lunch in a restaurant, a little Five Points pub in Atlanta, and they had a poster board, and I saw a poster on it that said, "Now in Atlanta, Cuong Nhu Oriental Martial Arts." And it attracted me initially just because it was a good design, and as an architect I'm interested in stuff like that. But the thing that really captured me was that it said, martial arts training for men, women, and children of all ages, races, and beliefs. And I thought, that's pretty darn inclusive, and it was interesting. So I called the founder of David Smith, Sensei David Smith, and he said, "Oh, we're having class tonight, and can you come on down?" And I said, "Not tonight, because I was interested. I always watch Hill Street Blues on Tuesday nights." So I said, but I went to next class on Thursday night, and I don't think I missed another class until after I was a black belt. And I figured out that class was over at 8:30. I could make it home in time to see Hill Street Blues.
I remember the show. It was popular back then. David, for you, same question. Although I read it in your bio, tell us about your first contact with Cuong Nhu, when, where, and with whom.
Well, I had journeyed from my previous home in northern Missouri to start graduate school at the University of Florida, working on a PhD in astronomy. And I went a week early for graduate student orientation, such as it was. And one of the things I had purchased sight unseen was a meal plan with the university. So I was standing in lunch line at Wrights Union one sunny day, and on the bulletin board, as I was reading while I was standing in the queue, was a mimeograph, if anybody remembers what that was.
Well, take a moment, but only a moment, to describe a mimeograph for those who don't know what it is.
So the mimeograph was the predecessor of the Xerox machine, if you would. That's the easiest way to explain it.
It had a very special smell, too.
But it had a very special smell because of the curing agent. So you learned as an early age to sniff the mimeo paper.
Okay, so you saw the mimeograph bulletin board object.
Yep, and it said, intramurals, martial arts, free. As a graduate student, free was a very important word. So I had never done anything physical in my life before. Didn't go out sports in high school, nothing. all the way through. So, but I had always been interested in martial arts, so I went on a lark to see what it was all about. And O-sensei was teaching the class.
Where was your class then?
Basement of Florida Gym.
Basement of Florida Gym.
And if the basement of Florida Gym is no longer like it was in the 70s, but it was a pit. and I was hooked.
So it wasn't out on Florida Field yet? Or
Oh,
it
it
had
was,
been...
well, my class was the one that caused it to move regularly on the Florida field.
Okay.
I was the roll taker for my class. There were 226 of us. The class behind me that contained Joe Montague and Jan Nelson and some of those people that was another 200. They were just over 200, but my class was the biggest. So there was almost 700 people in the dojo.
Where was Sung Ming Shu meeting at that time? Do you happen to remember the location?
Yeah, Sung Ming Shu started in the Morningside Recreation Center. We were in a rec center in town Atlanta.
What attracted you to Cuong Nhu at first?
When I first started taking classes, it was just right away, it was automatically, it seemed like a community. Mostly people roughly my age, younger, and it just had a great energy. And David was an inspiring teacher at the time.
So incidentally, there was a tradition, you may not know this, there was a tradition of the senior students teaching remedial classes at the University of Florida. You know, so there was Monday, Wednesday, Friday classes. Friday was kind of optional, but there was a Sunday class that was taught for those who did. I taught David Smith.
Oh, great. Yeah. Well, you taught him well because he was a really great sensei.
He was in my remedial class.
He must have passed.
For some perspective, how old were you when you started Cuong Nhu, Alan?
I was 29.
I was 21.
Okay. All right. You mentioned David Smith. For you, David, who was that individual, sensei or fellow student, who had the greatest impact on you as a martial arts practitioner or simply as an individual, and why?
Ooh. Well, I thought a lot about that question as you prepped us beforehand. I can't identify a single person. O-sensei, of course. But, you know, O-sensei was my teacher till I was a green belt. And during that period, he was getting ready to go back to Vietnam. He was transitioning us to other people along the way. So I had several key people, some of which are mentioned in other videos. So Ed Soroka was assigned to be my class's principal teacher, and Ed brought us up through brown belt. And then Master Van Essen and Master Lop were my teachers until I got my black belt. But my remedial teachers, all right, if you would, John Kay, John Benson, were they taught my Friday sessions, which were held at that time. The south end of Florida Field was just a little grassy patch. There was no bleachers on the south end of Florida Field. And we held the Friday classes out there for those who wanted to suffer through John Benson and John Kay. All right, and that was quite a bit of suffering. And then there were...
you understand none of this is being edited, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, good. I'm okay.
And then the two guys that taught my remedial sessions were a guy named Frank Blanchard and Rob Solov, both of which no longer train, but were phenomenal athletes, and without their encouragement I would have not made the progress that I made. So there's a lot of people that contributed.
Do you have one person, or you can name as many or more than David did?
Yeah, Master Mary Davis moved to Atlanta in, I think it was 1983 or maybe 1984. And Sensei David retired not long after that. He had hip problems, and Mary took over as head of school, so she was clearly my singular influence. I was her senior student for I guess, for as long as she was there. And she had a great impact on me, obviously.
Very good. Okay, who wants to take the funniest Cuong Nhu story first?
Oh, do you have a funny kind?
I do.
I have so many I couldn't choose. So
Let Alan get his.
Mine is, I'm like David, I have a billion of them, but the one that came to mind because I was thinking about Mary is, you know, I sparred with Mary a lot. And if you sparred with Mary, you know that she would kick you in the groin. It's a well-known fact. And of course, that's a legal target in Cuong Nhu, and we were, you know, we were cups and we were prepared, but it was something that I knew was going to happen, sparring with her. So one Saturday morning we were having sparring class, and I had this idea to rig up one of those little hotel bells, those little ding-dong bells, and I duct taped it to my cup under my pants. And I knew it was going to happen, and there were only a few people that were in on it that were there. And sure enough, we're sparring, and she kicks me in the groin, and it goes ding! And she stops, and she's like, "What was that?" And she goes like, kicks it again, just a little light, it goes ding! And then she just goes like ding, 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 ding. It was hilarious, it worked.
Oh dear.
That is great. Okay, David, give us your best one.
Well, I want to backtrack just.
That's going to be tough to.
Okay. I want to mention one other person that was a big effect on me, since Alan was in my class today, and that was Tak Fung, who started me.
Oh, yeah.
Who started me. He's no longer with us, of course, but he's the one who started me studying Tai Chi, and Alan suffered through my class today.
I did suffer through his class
The
today.
32nd time I taught that form at training camp.
I have just an aside on that Tak's daughter, Ming, is here, Ming Fong.
That's right.
And I had the privilege today, I inherited a good bit of stuff that was Master Mary's after her passing, and in that bin of stuff I found a letter from Tak, handwritten letter to Master Mary, and I was able to give it to Ming today.
Oh, wow.
And it was very touching.
So the funny story I'm going to tell is about me, because I like to laugh at myself too. So I was a green belt, and you mentioned training on Florida Field. Florida Field, you can tell all of us who trained on Florida Field because our side stances are exactly 3 feet, because the white hash marks were cooler than the AstroTurf. Florida Field was covered with AstroTurf. And we trained on Florida Field because there was really, if we had to train in the basement of the gym, these huge classes we were very crowded. And so it being Gainesville, you know, you could set your watch by the thunderstorm at 4:30 in the afternoon, right? So 4:30 in the afternoon comes, boom, classes start at 5:30, right? So Florida Field is just, it was like a sponge on the AstroTurf, right? So we're out there, and O-sensei is leading the class, and I was one of those brash students that was always up the front. So Mike Ponzio and Carolyn Frazier and I were always right at the front line. And so O-sensei started teaching us forward roll into a side drop with a kick, with a side kick, right? So you can imagine that every time you hit the mat, right, water went everywhere. And your uniform's getting wetter and wetter and starting to cling to your body. And about the 4th side kick, the entire crotch of my gi went out from the crotch all the way to the knee. All right. Now it was right at the end of class, so I didn't say anything, but I was on the front line. So I'm sitting here in the line with my hand kind of every time we'd stand up, I would hold my gi together, and we'd do another forward roll. I do the kick, and it would split a little further, right? And none of my senpais said anything. No sensei didn't say anything. So we got up, and I'm trying to bow out the end of class, right, with trying to hold my gi together. And O-sensei turns over to me and says, "Killian, sew up your uniform. All of a sudden, my embarrassment is known by my entire 93-member class.
Tie. Tie. Most poignant story. Now, you could lean on you gave the letter to Ming, Toc's letter to Mary, and
Yeah.
turned it over to Ming today. Do you have another one?
Probably one of my most interesting stories is before Leah and I were married, my wife Leah and I were married, Sensei was up in Atlanta and doing a seminar, and we were having dinner, and he took a real interest in Lee, and he said, okay, you're going to get married, and he was talking to her, and everybody thinks they can imitate Sensei, but he says, oh, you want to be a member of family, you have to take one green stripe. And he convinced Lee to start Cuong Nhu. And I thought that was, really touching that he would reach out to her that way. And she did, and she started, and she made it all the way through one brown stripe. And this is like over 25 years ago. And then her parents both fell ill kind of back to back, and she actually moved to South Georgia to care for them for a couple of years and then dropped out. And the interesting part of the story to me is that she started again 2 years ago, and she just passed her one brown stripe test for a second time.
That is fantastic. Tell us, David, most poignant story.
Well, as you probably know, Sensei's lived his final days with his daughter, Tu, in Gainesville. And my wife and I adopted 2 Russian orphans in 1997. And we own timeshare in Orlando, and so we would go take our children to the timeshare. And we always made it a point to go and we have friends in Gainesville with whom we could stay, and we would always make it a point to go and visit with Sensei in his decline. And the last visit that we had with Sensei before his death, my 2 children were there, and the delight that he was on his face from just he could no longer communicate with you verbally, but the delight from watching the children play in Tu's living room, and the delight I had every belief that he knew who I was. He just couldn't say a word. He would listen to, there was someone else, I can't remember who, another student who was visiting, and he would listen to us tell him stories about the early days in Gainesville, and the smile on his face and the light in his eyes was still there.
Doesn't surprise me. This question is labeled Cuong Nhu History. Memories of Sensei, you just shared a wonderful one, and the No family. Classes with Sensei, first U.S. black belt, stories from Vietnam, training camp memories. Pick your favorite among that group.
Oh,
Yeah.
There's a lot there.
A lot
Lots
there.
to cover.
that's a lot. So I'll tell a story, you tell a story, and we'll figure out when we run out of time.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
So I was the first black belt to test after Sensei's returned from Vietnam. I was telling this story earlier today to others. And during Sensei's absence, looking back on it now and looking at the problems that my seniors had been presented with so Lop was promoted to Shodan and John Benson were promoted to Shodan at my green stripe test. Then Sensei went back to Vietnam. So the subjective ability to judge a martial artist was not very well permeated through the senior ranks at that point.
Okay.
So in retrospect, my thinking is that the only way they felt confident with their ability to promote was that they made the tests more than what they had done. thankfully, you guys who came after me, Sensei started to change things after he saw my test. So this was in December of 1977. My test was 7.5 hours long. I did the entire Cuong Nhu curriculum from beginning to end and starting with 500 push-ups. 100 on the knuckles, 100 on the fingertips, 100 on the back of the wrists, and 100 on each arm individually. And then we did 300 chops and punches, and then 300 side lunges, and then I started the test. All right, and so my testing committee was Sensei, of course, but Mary, John Benson, John Kay, Frank Van Essen, Melinda Chansey, and Lop for 7 hours. them and me. Yeah, I had a half hour for lunch.
You were the only one testing.
I was the only one testing.
Oh my gosh.
So things have changed a bit.
Things have changed a bit.
Yeah, but it was
goodness.
after my exam that Sensei started saying, well, that was, Master Quinn remembers that test. Master Quinn was about 12 and his eyes were about this big. He had never seen a person my size that could do push-ups.
Pick a story, Alan.
Oh, there's plenty of them, but because of my relationship with Master Mary, I spent a lot of time in Gainesville. In fact, a lot of people to this day think that I started in Gainesville, which is not true. I was from Atlanta, but Mary and I wasn't married then, and we would drive down to Gainesville 3 or 4 times a year and train with those sensei. And the thing that I remember the most, we know about his memory issues later in life, but at that time, he would always remember, he would remember me, but he would not only remember me, he would remember the conversations that we had had the last time I was there. And it was remarkable. He would pick up wherever we left off, and he was interested in my work, and I thought it was remarkable. And that my test was given by Sensei, and he was a loving man, but he was intense, and as we all know. And we had a test in 2 parts. We had a kind of a black belt training seminar in the fall of '85, and then the actual test was in January of '86. So we're down there in the fall of '85, and he's working us out, and we were doing, he had us doing figure eights with the bow, going laterally, and I'm sure that David can remember this. He's probably done it up and down the floor, side to side, side to side, up and down the floor. And we're doing that over and over. And he disappears into the office. And we're all, we're not going to stop. And I don't know what he was doing in there, but he might have forgotten we were out there or whatever. But we didn't stop. And it's 20, 25 minutes later, and he finally pops out and goes, "Oh, okay." But my test was not as intense as David's by any means, but it was still most of the day. But the thing I remember the most is we did public speaking in the evening because we had used up the time. And this was before Sensei's health days. He shows up with Pepsis and donuts and at 8 o'clock at the dojo, and we're doing public speaking, I think there were about 20 people on our test, and it took a couple of hours. And we're sitting around until close to midnight, and nobody else is there except those sensei. But.
Great. Okay. What is your favorite thing about Cuong Nhu now?
You want to go first?
Yeah, go, Dave.
This is my family.
I think that's going to be both of our favorite things.
All right. This, I am closer to this group of people than I am to my actual family. All right. Save my brother and sister. This is my family. All right.
The answer doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, ditto, because this is our community, it's our family. We're here at our annual family reunion. It's an amazing community, where you can have friends of all ages and such diversity.
And this is why you've stayed involved for so long.
I think so.
I don't
mean,
know what other people do on Memorial Day weekend. I am, as was said earlier, I am the only person legally to have been at all the campouts to
I'm
date.
trying to understand the legally term.
Well, all right, so it's a very important point, because until 1984, you had to be ranked brown belt or above to even attend a campout.
That's true.
So at campout number 1, Grandmaster Quinn was a second brown stripe. And, you know, he used family connections to get in. Because he and his brothers did demonstrate some things for us. But they spent most of the time swimming in the lake while the rest of us were sweating.
And I went to that 1984 camp out. That was the first time that you could go when you were not a brown belt or above.
Jacksonville.
Yeah, in Jacksonville. And I haven't missed one since, to this day.
It's quite a feat in and of itself. Let's talk about the future. What do you see for the future, Alan?
Well, I hope that Cuong Nhu will thrive and live long after David and I are gone. I hope the future is long and prosperous. You know, I feel, as I mentioned in the Black Belt meeting tonight, I feel very strongly that the next generations have to start to step up to replace us and keep Cuong Nhu alive and thriving. But I know that can happen. We have a bunch of wonderful people and talented martial artists and great leaders. They just need to rise to the top.
That's pretty much summarizes my view as well. I mean, the future is not in my generation. Alan's in the second generation, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
So it's not even in his generation. It's in the people that were promoted today, and we need to make sure that they succeed.
And the children, even. We have children's tests at Sung Ming Hsu, and we're fortunate to have this after-school program, and we have, you know, tests with 125, 150 kids, and almost every test, I look at them, and I sometimes say that, you know, one of these days, some of you, hopefully, are going to be standing up here where we are in this place, and you'll be, you know, conducting these tests.
Have you had a child go, we'll say start at a tender age, whether it's, you know, somewhere between 5 and 8 years old, and really stick it through to black belt and still be with you?
Oh, absolutely. Sensei Rachel Gowan, who just passed her Sandan test, and by the way, is the first Sandan woman at Sung Ming Hsu since Master Mary was there, started when she was 6 years old, and she's 30 years old now. So yes.
That is great. David, how would you like to be remembered as a person and as a martial artist?
Ooh.
You knew this was coming, don't you?
Yeah, I know. I had trouble writing any crib notes here. I think I'd like to be remembered as a teacher, right? You know, your mark on the future is the people that you've affected that can take it forward, you know? A lot of people, poor Alan suffered through my classes before. but even back when I was a hard stylist mostly.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. So that would be my contribution. I would like to be remembered as a good teacher.
And I think we both, you know, have that desire, and I'd like to be remembered as a competent martial artist and a leader, and hopefully one that has influenced people that have come behind me, you know, and hopefully they see me as a happy and loving person and a good dancer.
You've got that already. Why are you not teaching If Frankenstein's Monster Did Aikido this year?
Frankenstein's dead.
You know, I try to keep. Let me tell you the story about why I'm teaching Aikido mostly. So in 1985, I was preparing for my Sandan test. And since I left Gainesville in '78, I came back regularly, twice a year probably, for most of the intervening years. But O-sensei started adding all of the soft style stuff in the pre his departure realm. We did a few things, rolls and drops and a few self-defense things, but we really had no soft style curriculum until he returned from Vietnam. But he started adding all of that stuff after I had moved to Washington, D.C. And he was adding things that I had no background in, and I had to seek my own. So there was a whole lot of soft style stuff added to the Sandan curriculum, and I had no provision for going up. So one of my students, at that time I had a dojo in suburban DC, had started going to an Aikido school because it was to supplement his own training. And he said, well, come along to my dojo. So I went to the dojo. It was a wonderful place. It was very much like a Cuong Nhu place. All right, could have been. And I started training regularly to prepare for my Sandan. I took my Sandan in the summer of 1987. O-sensei came to DC and administered the last piece of it there. And after the test, he took me, and I actually used most of my Aikido I had learned over the previous 2 years as part of my self-defense demo. And I don't know what led O-sensei to do this. He came up to me and he said, continue to learn Aikido and bring it back to Cuong Nhu. And so I've been teaching Aikido at training camp for a long time now, since 1996.
Yes or no, will you bring back Frankenstein's monster?
I will probably bring back Frankenstein's
Thank you very
monster.
much. You taught me Niju
Shiho.
Shiho.
Yeah.
1 year, and I've been looking every year for it. Will you teach Niju Shiho again?
All right, Joe. I'll teach Nihu Shiho next year. I'm gonna have to go back and practice it some, but yes.
Probably so. I know I've forgotten it.
Yeah.
And Niju Shiho means?
24 moves?
24 directions.
24 directions, yeah.
Thank you. Ready to wrap it up?
We're
I
good.
got more material, but we don't have more time.
Well, we can stop it here. We can continue to talk. Because I'm having a wonderful time. I have old memories of O-sensei. They're not anywhere near as clear as yours, and I didn't have that much history. But he affected me enough that when I found out 30 years later that there was a Cuong Nhu dojo in Jacksonville, I went there.
Mm-hmm.
And I have been there ever since.
Let me tell you the story about the first time I met his wife. So, O-sensei started a tradition with my test of when you got your promoted to Shodan, that you actually, he would invite you to his home for dinner.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So he was working at the university at that time. He said, be at the house at this time and please come for dinner. And I couldn't bring anything. And he wouldn't let, very gracious host. But I show up at his house. This is just a few months after they've arrived from Vietnam. And Chow, his wife, met me at the door, and O-sensei wasn't there. And I had never met his wife before. I was a little bit intimidated. And she was so gracious. She invited me in. We had tea. She showed me pictures of Vietnam. We had a wonderful conversation. Many years later, I started teaching. I was her Tai Chi instructor for a while. We became great friends. But, so O-sensei rushes in late. Kids come in from school. And, like I said, the Bao was like 14. Kim was 12 or something like that. So Ang was little and Tu was just a small, teeny. And O-sensei and his wife were incredibly good cooks. And they fed you more than you could possibly eat. But one of the things O-sensei liked to make was these Vietnamese spring rolls that were about the size of a chimichanga, right? Right, and they were wonderful. So I had never seen them before, and he serves me some of these. And there's a dish of condiments, and along the condiments over here were some bright red strips of things and so the boys, Bao and Quinn in particular, say, "Oh, you're supposed to, take a bite of this and a bite of that and a bite of this, and eat it as a combination." And I had chopsticks, and they were amazed I could use chopsticks. But so I started to do that, and I'm talking along and talking to O-sensei, taking some of the red stuff, chewing it up, and they're looking at me going, "Oh, what?" And their eyes are getting about this big around. And the red stuff was a habanero pepper, all right?
Hot.
All right, so, but what they didn't know was that my parents were from southern Louisiana, and I grew up eating chili peppers for snack food. So I was eating, and the boys couldn't eat the hot pepper at that time, and they had never seen a Caucasian that could eat as much hot pepper as their father. And so this forged a relationship between me and O-sensei. Every time he came to my dojo, he brought me hot peppers from his garden from then on. So
That is great.
I'd like to say, to wrap up, that I think, that's a good example of O-sensei's generosity. He was a very generous man, obviously, with his time and his life. And I think he did a good job of passing it on to Grandmaster Quinn. Tonight, we saw some slides of O-sensei when he was 34. And
back in my day,
it was remarkable how much they look alike. But that spirit, I think, that he conveyed to his family and to Grandmaster Quinn particularly is remarkable.
Guys, I want to thank you very much. Appreciate the time.
Thank
cool.
you.
Thank you.